Welcome to the October 2023 statewide call of the California Alliance for Community Energy. The mission of the Alliance is to support and defend community choice energy programs in California that advance local clean energy for the environmental, economic, and social benefit of our communities. And I'm Brett Garrett. I'm a member of the steering committee representing what we now call Santa Cruz, California, which is part of the unceded territory of the Awaswas-speaking Yupi tribe, part of the Amamutsan tribal band. And I'm going to hand it over to Barbara to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I'm excited today that we have Shaina Nanavati here to speak about Reclaim Our Power's work around statewide work around Golden State Energy and associated movements. And Shaina is the Director of Research for the Reclaim Our Power campaign, which is really a campaign. And so they will tell us more about what the work that they have been doing, the research, and the report they recently did with a agency around Golden State Energy. So, Shaina, are you ready to take it away?
I am, yeah, and I just want to say I'm on video on my phone and I'm going to share screen on my computer. So I can go ahead and do the screen share now. Thank you for that introduction, Barbara. I'll just add that Al was in my head during most of this. And so I really hope to do him justice and channel Al in the appropriate ways. So yeah, I just wanted to say hello. My name is Shaina Nanavati. I lead research for the Reclaim Our Power campaign. And I'm going to be sharing a little bit about a report that we published and some of our visions for utility transformation for and by the Frontlines. And so Reclaim Our Power, I'm sure most of you know of our work by now. We're a coalition of fire survivors, environmental justice communities, people with disabilities, ratepayers, and workers. And here's a picture of our latest leadership team retreat where we're all happily kind of scheming up the next phase of our campaign together. And so I don't really need to spend a lot of time talking about the reasons that we're doing this. I think everybody here is more than aware of all of the history of PG&E's crimes. And really today, the wildfires, power shutoffs, the rate increases are continuing. And no one has really stepped up to shape meaningful policies to rein PG&E in. And so that's a big part of our work. And so a lot of our focus has been around, showing that the for-profit model, the prioritizing shareholder profits over safety, the liabilities passed on to the people through the wildfire fund, and the CPUC, being beholden to IOU lobbyists and interests, is kind of the landscape that we've been working in for a while. But I really want to call you all's attention to this chart over here that shows the largest shareholders of PG&E. It's mostly investment firms and the largest investment firms in the country. And number 4 on here, the fourth highest owner, is actually the PG&E Fire Victims Trust. And so they had concocted this brilliant scheme to tie any wildfire reparations to their share price. And so essentially as a state, we've been locked into keeping PG&E in business. And so cities like San Francisco, like San Jose, have been attempting to municipalize, attempting to create alternatives, whether to buy PG&E's, their portion of PG&E's grid from them, or to be able to develop in unserved areas of their cities through their own municipal utilities. And the one thing that, we kind of assessed is basically that these are two of the highest like customer bases for PG&E. And so, though through their safety certificate scheme, through AB 1054, PG&E has been protected for now from facing the actions of their consequences. They're deeply in debt, and as a company, deeply unstable. And so there's very valid threats to them staying in business. And of course, these are probably maps you all have seen, especially on the left, of high wildfire threat districts in California that map on almost exactly to PG&E's territory. And then the two maps on the left, and the middle map and the second map show the widespread so-called public safety power shutoff outages, what Jessica on this call christened the BSPS, bullshit, power shutoffs. And you can see just like how long these are lasting, who they're impacting, the duration of these power shutoffs. And this is all research done by PSC Healthy Communities. And so you can, if you look at this map of PG&E's, territory, and then you look at the fires and the shutoffs, it's really clear. It makes apparent what the problem is, who's bearing the brunt of these impacts, and that we need a new solution. And so Reclaim Our Power is here to build a movement to convince decision makers to abolish PG&E and replace it with a safe, reliable, renewable, regenerative, decentralized utility, potentially towards multiple utilities that are community and worker controlled. We believe that energy is a human right, and the utility is a site of struggle where we fight against Wall Street ownership and control of the infrastructure decisions that can literally mean life or death for the people. We believe in transformation, not reform, yet we acknowledge that creating the political will in the state of California and to be able to shift power away from corporate interest, we're going to need a mass movement to win meaningful gains for low income, working class, Black, Indigenous, and people of color in California. And so a lot of our focus is really on alternatives to PG&E. We do need a solution that removes the profit motive of PG&E, which drives their decision making, that provides pathways to local governance and democracy, but does not leave lower income and rural communities footing the bill. And so through our relationships and organizing in San Francisco, we were able to have this study outline of a comprehensive study published with the San Francisco Local Agency Formation Commission, which some of you all may know is where Clean Power SF, their CCA, is housed. And basically what we've laid out here is a series of topics that need to be further developed to understand what kind of a vision is possible for a nonprofit replacement to PG&E. And we'll be talking a little bit more in detail about the contents of the report. And so you all may have heard of Golden State Energy, maybe everyone hasn't. But basically this was a bill that exists. The Golden State Energy Act was passed in 2020 as one of the pieces of PG&E's bailout. So after the CPUC put them through their sham restructuring process, AB 1054 allowed them to continue to pass wildfire liabilities onto ratepayers. There was still a bill passed in the legislature that authorized basically a receiver to assume possession of PG&E's property and operate its electrical and gas systems if the CPUC determined that it was needed. And so while we've been organizing and fighting within the CPUC's own 6-step process, which has largely moved nowhere, we're still kind of, working to put more definition onto this bill. As of right now, Golden State Energy was authorized as a nonprofit public benefit corporation that would own, control, operate, or manage the electrical and gas services for its ratepayers and for the benefit of all Californians. This bill also established a 9-member board of directors for Golden State Energy and a process for Golden State Energy's bylaws to be amended to change the board consistency to be those who are elected by Golden State Energy's customers and some who are appointed. And so while there's a lot of work we still have to do around kind of, figuring out, is this even a board structure that works for us? What the relationship would be with the Public Utilities Commission of this entity. We were able to kind of start to put a little bit more definition around what else needs to happen, what the role and structure of Golden State Energy could look like. And so kind of the six categories that we started to define and list out further research questions for in this report were around Golden State Energy as a provider of last resort, for it to operate, for it to own a transmission system for the public good, and for it to promote a distribution system operator model. And when we talk about the structure of Golden State Energy, we really are emphasizing democratic governance, publicly accountable financing, and the mandate for a just transition. And I'll talk a little bit more about all of these. Initially, these have been kind of broken out into sections, but I try to share today in a way that lays out all the interconnectedness of all of these and how interrelated a lot of these pieces are. And so Golden State Energy is a provider of last resort. Really, I think I want to emphasize here, you all have probably been involved in municipalization fights, but the barriers for cities to municipalize are political rather than legal or technical. And as a provider of last resort, Golden State Energy could facilitate transition for local cities to municipalize by ensuring that those who are remaining on the ex-PG&E grid, the Golden State Energy grid, are still have constant electricity access. Those who cannot or choose not to form local load serving entities. And there was actually a proceeding in 2020 that was opened at the CPUC that's really gone nowhere to develop rules and regulations for a provider of last resort that also came out of the PG&E bankruptcy drama. That is still one site where these rules can continue to be developed. But the main thing is that it's going to be able to provide uninterrupted service in the event that a provider fails. So really providing kind of a back in the event that local entities are moving towards municipalization, it's not leaving anyone behind. And I've really been liking using maps lately, and so I kind of pulled these together to show all the different kind of alternatives to investor-owned utilities that currently exist right in the country. The first map on the top left shows public power, mostly municipal utilities across the country. And as you can see, they are far greater represented on the east of the Mississippi, I guess, the eastern half of the country. The second map on the top shows America's rural electric cooperatives. And I used to work for a rural electric cooperative in North Carolina. And so coming here and just seeing this map, California specifically there are 4 tiny rural electric co-ops in California. But if you go back to that map of the high fire threat districts, much of Northern California and much of PG&E's territory is rural. And so there's an understanding for most of the country that managing a rural grid is a completely different job than managing an urban grid. And so one of the other things, that I think is nuts about PG&E is that they insist that they can do it all, whereas most of the rest of the country they know better. And I'd love to go into the history and potential of rural electric co-ops at some point, but really what I want to show here is just that there's a lot of other alternatives and potential. Finally, I want to show this bottom left slide, shows the small number of tribally owned electric utilities in the country. And so as we're talking about cities or co-ops, I think it's important to also add in tribal utilities into the mix as considerations for indigenous sovereignty and land ownership and alternative ownership models that are centering ownership in the hands of those who have been most impacted currently and historically by the violence of the fossil fuel energy system and America's colonization. And this fourth map here just kind of ties to the tribal utilities map. It's kind of around, I mentioned potential for rural electric co-ops, but this bottom right map shows all of the tribal kind of like land in the US and their solar potential. And so there's just another kind of like obvious potential for growth of local clean energy of like within these sovereign nations, if we're able to kind of like remove the grasp from the investor-owned utilities. And so, yeah, I want to go back to the slide and really show again that this this list of the investor owners, right, and then the contradictions or the like incentives become really clear. These are kind of the most like profitable hedge funds in the country that have a lot to lose from us moving to local control of our energy resources. And this is maybe also a slide that some of you all have seen, but just emphasizing, you can see on the right that some of the highest rates are of the investor-owned utilities in California. And while there's a lot to be said here about territory size, there's also a lot of other incentives, namely returning profits to their shareholders that the majority of publicly owned utilities do not have. And so I also want to talk a little bit about, the role of the Democratic board, or what a nonprofit would do differently than an investor-owned utility. And there's a lot here because traditionally, I mean, to this day, most municipal utilities still are kind of driven by like cost-based rate making and kind of like cost recovery as their like main ideology. And so one of the things I think that we're wanting like ideologically a utility to support, whereas like, if something that has more democratic, transparent, like access for us to engage with, there's a wealth of different, performance measures that can be incorporated into decision making for a nonprofit utility. And so we're actually working with students at the University of Michigan Energy Justice in one of their energy justice classes to conduct interviews with frontline utilities and energy advocates to build on our LAFCO report, to really try to understand like the possibility for alternative ownership models for the kind of list of performance things we'd want to see that are on this slide. And another kind of criteria that we're using to start to develop, what it is that we want this utility to stand for, is this list of guiding policy priorities for Justice 40 benefits that has been kind of made official by the DOE, but that really stems from the work of energy advocates like Tony Reams and Shalonda Baker, whom you all may know of, and really looking at kind of the impacts of the energy system. So wanting to just decrease energy burdens, decrease environmental exposures, increase parity in clean energy technology and access, increasing access to low-cost capital, increasing clean energy enterprise creation and contracting, clean energy jobs and training, increasing energy resilience, and increasing energy democracy. All of these specifically for disadvantaged communities and those who have been priced out. And so we'll talk a little bit about the just transition in a while, but I think to like emphasize again that removing the profit motive from the utility can provide a load of options for publicly accountable financing. They'll gain access to lower rates, better financing terms from state, federal, and even private lending. And there's a lot of different avenues kind of to make this happen. And so in the Golden State Energy Bill, as it's written, the California's Infrastructure Bank, the iBank, which is kind of transforming into, I won't say transforming, but it's becoming a green bank that is supposed to receive billions of dollars from the IRA right now from the federal government. They're kind of in the bill listed as the entity that could offer special bonds or rates to Golden State Energy for it to serve in the public interest. It is not a very democratic institution, and so there's a lot of possibility, I think, for us to continue to explore local and other funding mechanisms We're learning a lot from San Francisco's public bank work, and the possibility for things like municipal bonds, different ways to fund distribution system infrastructure build out. Whereas right now, even the iBank and most kind of private lenders are focusing on transmission build out and funding the big capital intensive projects, because that's what makes their investors the most money. And so really, we want to emphasize the public control of the transmission system, because as you all know by now, that overbuilding of transmission projects is the thing that is the moneymaker. I don't think I need to prove this point to you all, but I think I do want to kind of briefly spend a second on this slide of really this drives home the point of us needing a region-wide solution. And so that for cities and localities to be breaking off one by one, doing their own thing, isn't really going to solve the problem. And yeah, so rather than 1,000 different fights, we're organizing one fight against PG&E to move us towards local control, to kind of keep transmission costs from ballooning as they are currently doing and poised to do through PG&E's and all the IOUs kind of like driving of fixed costs at the CPUC. And so another piece of kind of the puzzle is that we want this entity to be promoting a statewide distribution system operator model that allows DERs to compete with utility scale renewables, to have a neutral third party that's responsible for balancing local supply and demand at the distribution level, that can facilitate the growth of DERs and local microgrids for resilience and reliability. And ultimately, there are still many questions left to be answered here for us. How can privately owned DERs be used for the public good? And if we believe that there's another impending of restructuring of California's energy system, and that the fight between centralized and decentralized power continues, with last year's regionalization bill, the push for massive investments in transmission, with no real discussion of the alternatives, what role can an independent distribution system operator play in a managed decentralization of our grid? And really the utility's biggest playing card right now is their ownership and operation of distribution systems. And I think this key thing here is why Golden State Energy is poised as we're talking about it as like a political entity, right? So often we think about our IOUs as they definitely have political interests, and they're not aligned with ours. And so I think thinking about this Golden State Energy as a entity that really brings the concept of justice into the energy decision making. And finally, we don't want DERs just for the sake of DERs. If we have a Tesla for all, that means very soon we're going to be coming up upon the limits of lithium, cobalt, other mineral extraction, not to mention the human toll, the land and water impacts of those operations, to satiate our individual high consumption cultures, right? And so we really want to kind of have this mandate for managed decommission of natural gas infrastructure, safeguarding existing workers' jobs and pensions is a key part of this transition, to make sure that we have the sufficient workforce and that the existing workforce isn't being abandoned in this transition to a nonprofit utility, and really expanding and diversifying the utility workforce. And then there's that big question about the Wildfire Victims Fund, which is currently tied to PG&E stock price, and how we're going to kind of, ensure payouts and reparations for fire survivors in the case that the utility shifts ownership. And of course, emphasizing equitable decarbonization, local resilience, and affordability. And this slide, this graphic here, maybe some of you all have seen, was developed by Movement Generation and the Climate Justice Alliance. that really emphasizes that we need to be moving overall from like an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. We need a whole economy and paradigm shift. And Golden State Energy is one vehicle for energizing Californians who are just tired of their towns being burned down, their power being shut off, and being priced out of their homes, to organize against the systems that are, putting all their energy and money into fueling war and poverty around the world. And so we can't just think about it as ownership shift, but really this, like I said, a paradigm shift that includes, governance, transparency, and democracy, but also kind of like a shift in how we're thinking about a collective use of our resources for the public benefit rather than individual gain. And so I think I'll end on this slide. Really appreciate kind of the wealth of knowledge that this group has. And as we're kind of like moving forward in our research to define this, to have more to talk about to fuel our organizing efforts. Here's some topics that I think I'd love to spark discussion with around you all. What are the conditions that can incentivize investments by a utility such as Golden State Energy that is not for profit into DERs, into grid modernization and upgrades and maintenance of the grid? How do we socialize the costs of a nonprofit transmission system? And what criteria are we using? Is it region? Is it income? Is it through taxes? Or is it through rates? Is it something else? And how can CCAs relate to the distribution grid operators and owners in a way that does facilitate local investments? Right now, there's a tricky, like you either get a CCA or a municipal utility. And so they've been kind of pitted against each other in a lot of areas, or in San Francisco, the plan is to combine them, but how can we kind of like work together in a way that kind of like meets our shared goals? And finally, if, we do have an independent distribution system operator that we're advocating for, what's the democratic governance possibility there, so we don't end up with another CAISO that's just stacked with, the governor's kind of ideological allies, I'll say. And I'll pause here. I can either keep this slide up or I can stop sharing screen. But that's all I have. Thank you all.
Wow, thank you so much, Shaina. This is for me, I'm very excited about this concept of taking over PG&E. Please visit us on the web at californiacommunityenergy.org and engage with us online in the Alliance's discussion group. Please spread the word about the Alliance to help us continue to grow.